I was sitting in a high-end cafe this morning watching the typical morning rush. There was this well-dressed man, looked like a CEO, sharp suit, tapping away on the latest iPhone. He seemed the picture of American success. Confident, secure, the master of his domain. He looked like he had the world on a string. But then the barista handed him his latte. He took one sip, and the transformation was instant and honestly a little terrifying. The foam was apparently a millimeter too thick, or perhaps the temperature was off by a degree. That polite corporate smile vanished in a split second, replaced by a contorted mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He didn't just complain, he exploded. He slammed the cup down so hard, coffee splattered onto the counter, screaming at a teenage barista with a vein bulging in his neck. He looked less like a functioning adult and more like a toddler in a three-piece suit, trembling with a tantrum over warm milk. Watching this meltdown, I felt a strange chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. It wasn't just about a rude customer, it was a glimpse into a terrifying fragility lurking beneath our culture of comfort. Here was a man living in the peak of civilization, surrounded by luxury, yet a microscopic inconvenience shattered his entire reality. It forced me to ask a disturbing question. If this is how the average American reacts to a bad latte, what happens when the grocery stores actually go empty? If we strip away the toys and the comfort, are we looking at a civilized society, or are we standing in a cage with millions of dormant zombies just waiting for the lights to go out to show their true nature?
That's a chilling observation.
Yeah.
And a really, really insightful one.
It was unsettling.
Because your anecdote, it really hits on the core vulnerability of modern American society. It's this terrifying fragility that's just simmering right under the surface of all this comfort.
Right.
That microscopic inconvenience, the latte.
Yeah.
It exposed this deep erosion of civility. And more than that, a lack of psychological preparedness. And this isn't some random one-off thing.
No, it felt systemic.
It is systemic. It goes way beyond just coffee shops. It affects how we govern ourselves, our politics, even our national security. It's this huge gap between, unprecedented material wealth and just a complete lack of psychological resilience.
Okay, so that's what we need to unpack. We're going to do a deep dive on this today. The mission here is to really investigate the sociological and even philosophical mechanics behind this fragility. We want to focus on how the decline of these organic social bonds and this rise of what feels like pervasive entitlement, how that creates these cracks in our society. Fissures that are, as we'll see, being actively exploited.
And it's not just an academic exercise?
Not at all. We are connecting these seemingly minor social breakdowns, like a guy yelling about a latte, directly to major, honestly, existential geopolitical consequences. We're going to look at how our adversaries are leveraging this internal division, this psychological softness, to their advantage.
Okay, let's get into it.
So let's start with that idea, micro-fragility. That CEO's explosion is the perfect example. It feels like we're seeing this pattern where, this deep sense of entitlement gets triggered by the tiniest flaw in an environment that's completely optimized for convenience.
And that trigger transforms immediately into this explosive, totally disproportionate rage.
Exactly. It's like the population is just perpetually on the edge of a breakdown, just waiting for that system of comfort to have a minor glitch.
And that entitlement, it confirms a really profound sense of being spoiled, almost like a societal level toddler that hasn't learned any impulse control. I mean, if you just stop and think about the list of mundane things that trigger these reactions now, it's really startling.
It is.
We're talking about things that, a generation ago were just considered normal friction, the stuff of daily life. But now they're seen as these deep personal attacks that justify screaming or even violence.
Oh, the list is endless. And it would be funny if it wasn't so serious. It could be something as simple as a driver actually obeying the speed limit.
Right, holding someone up for 3 seconds.
Or an app that takes 5 seconds to download from a server halfway across the world. Even tiny service mistakes, like getting sausage instead of bacon on your breakfast sandwich, that can lead to a full-blown meltdown.
The sources we looked at listed everything. A delayed Amazon package, a tech support line that doesn't answer on the first ring.
Yeah.
It's this expectation of flawless, instant service for everything.
Even online stuff. A comment not getting enough likes or feeling canceled by some tiny group of strangers, it's treated with the same emotional weight as a real threat to your life.
And that focus on these tiny external flaws just perfectly illustrates a population that has become Well, profoundly spoiled by a culture of convenience.
But the risk here, the underlying risk is it's genuinely profound. Yeah. This psychological brittleness, it means the population is just completely unprepared psychologically for the kind of provisional sacrifices you need in a real national crisis. They don't have the emotional bandwidth to handle a minor inconvenience, let alone, serious economic hardship or a military draft or any prolonged period of national sacrifice you'd need to maintain security against a major rival.
And this is exactly where that apocalyptic zombie metaphor used at the beginning.
Yeah.
This is where it stops being a metaphor and starts feeling chillingly real.
Right.
The existential threat isn't a virus. It's the erosion of our humanity in the wake of unchecked individualism. I mean, what happens when you actually strip away the comfort too? Do we pull together?
Or do we reveal this underlying adult-child depravity where my immediate self-interest just trumps everything else?
Exactly. The argument is that people who can't handle a cold latte will instantly turn on each other when the stakes are real. They will prioritize their immediate survival, their immediate comfort over the rule of law, over community, over everything.
And that collapse of civility, it happens precisely because the very structures, the social scaffolding that used to build grit and cooperation have been systematically taken apart.
Which brings us to the erosion of community, the famous bowling alone phenomenon.
Yes, exactly.
Robert Putnam's work on this was groundbreaking. He showed with hard data this huge aggregate decline in membership in traditional civic groups since the 1950s.
We're physically closer than ever in cities, but socially we're more isolated.
Totally. But we have to be specific here because it's crucial to distinguish between the two types of social capital that have declined. They do very different things for a society.
Okay, let's break them down. So first you have what's called bonding social capital.
Right, the bonding.
These are the connections that happen within a homogenous group. So, your tight-knit family, your local church group, maybe an ethnic club, they provide that immediate support and a strong sense of identity. They reinforce the us.
Exactly. But then there's the other, and arguably more critical type, for a big, diverse republic. And that's bridging social capital.
And that's the one that connects different groups.
That's the one. It unites people from different social circles, different economic classes, different political views. This is the stuff that builds trust and cooperation across those lines. It's the glue that lets a diverse society function as a single public.
And the really tragic part is that while these huge mass member organizations, like AARP or the Sierra Club, they've grown in numbers.
They've exploded.
But they don't actually build either type of capital. Yeah. As Putnam pointed out, for most people, membership is just writing a check for dues or perhaps occasionally reading a newsletter.
That is the key insight. It's a low-friction, transactional relationship with a brand, not a high-friction, relationship-building interaction with other human beings.
Right.
It doesn't create deep social connection. It doesn't create the civic skills you need for a functioning democracy, which requires you to work with people you don't always agree with. You don't learn that from an email newsletter.
So what you get is this replacement of real community with transactions or just with digital connections. And this isolation, it correlates directly with the rise of the therapeutic state and what you could call individualized suffering.
It's the great paradox of our era.
It is. We see individualism and isolation linked directly to worse mental health, loneliness, hopelessness, all while we're living at the absolute peak of material civilization.
We have solved almost every material problem our ancestors faced, yet our psychological well-being is it's in free fall. And the thing is, the drive for connection, it's foundational to being human. Attachment theory shows we have a basic fundamental need for social proximity to survive and thrive.
And a healthy, functioning support system is supposed to be the buffer against that. It's what provides the resilience we seem to be losing. We're not just talking about having friends. We're talking about a whole psychological ecosystem.
Exactly. Research has identified 6 key components of what real social support looks like. First, you need emotional closeness, which they call attachment.
Okay.
You need social integration, which is just having meaningful relationships that place you inside a community. Then there's the opportunity for nurturance. This one is huge.
Oh, wait, let's pause on that one. The opportunity for nurturance. Why is giving care so important for the person who's giving it?
It's absolutely critical because it gives you a fundamental sense of purpose and competence. If you have no one relying on you, if your existence doesn't materially impact another person's well-being, a child, an elderly parent, a neighbor, you lose a core psychological defense against nihilism and, frankly, self-pity.
So that responsibility for someone else grounds you.
It acts as a vital counterweight to this unchecked, self-indulgent individualism.
Okay, so after nurturance, the other three components are reassurance of worth, so people acknowledging your skills, guidance, having mentors, and reliable alliance, knowing people will be there for you.
Right. And when all of those organic systems are gone, that's when you get the rise of the therapeutic state.
Which is what, exactly?
It's where corporate policies and government structures, they step in to replace the family and the community as the main source of emotional regulation. The individual isn't expected to build their own grid anymore. They're expected to manage their feelings through institutional processes.
Which brings us to that incredible anecdote about Liam, the graphic designer. I mean, the story just perfectly captures the whole dynamic.
It really does. So he gets some feedback, right? Totally normal, constructive feedback on a font choice he made.
Something that happens a dozen times a day in that kind of job.
A dozen times a day.
Yeah.
But because he was raised without that traditional structure that teaches you how to take criticism, for him, it wasn't a learning opportunity. It was an attack on his core self-worth.
And his response was?
His response was to immediately use the corporate therapeutic system. He filed a formal complaint that the feedback made him feel unsafe.
Unsafe from font criticism.
And then, get this, he requested paid mental health leave to process the, quote, trauma of it all. It's the perfect, if dark, illustration of how a system designed to protect people actually ends up paralyzing them.
It replaces, what's the phrase, organic resilience of character with bureaucratic coddling.
That's it. It teaches dependence, not toughness.
And this reliance on bureaucracy, it ties directly into the critique from the psychiatrist Thomas Szasz, his work on the medicalization of suffering.
Yes. By focusing only on the biological symptoms, diagnosing someone with depression, for example, you make the whole experience an individual clinical defect.
And by individualizing it, you do two things, both bad.
Both terrible. First, you completely ignore the social context. You ignore the lack of community that's actually causing the problem. Your community is weak, so you feel disconnected, but the diagnosis is about your brain chemistry. And second, it turns a structural problem into a clinical one. Social disconnection becomes an attachment disorder that you treat with therapy or drugs instead of with community and shared purpose.
Szasz's argument was that this makes people see themselves as having defects instead of having just normal human reactions to a world that lacks connection and meaning.
Exactly. It lets society off the hook. It absolves us of the need to rebuild communities and tells the individual the fix is in a pill or an office, not in the hard work of re-engaging with other people.
This loss of resilience, this retreat into the self, it's not just a social problem. It leads us right into the erosion of the entire philosophical structure that built modern prosperity in the first place.
Right. To really get what's happening today, you have to go back and understand the foundations of classical liberalism, as defined by thinkers like Ludwig von Mises.
And Mises was very clear. He argued that classical liberalism isn't some special interest party platform.
No, not at all. For him, it was just the application of rational thought to social policy. The goal was simple: the general welfare of all citizens, achieved through free markets, private property, and limited government. It's a system based on reason, not on emotion.
And he always stressed that this system benefits the masses most of all, not just the rich. The whole point of private property is that it's the bedrock for the division of labor.
Which then creates unprecedented wealth. We just take for granted that the average person has access to, affordable clothing, abundant food, mass entertainment, things that were once luxuries only for kings.
The very conveniences that the CEO in my story was so angry about were only possible because of this rational liberal structure.
But, and this is Mises' crucial point, maintaining this rational system requires something he called provisional sacrifices.
Which is the core difference between long-term thinking and just immediate gratification.
Precisely. Rational action means you're willing to endure a short-term pain or disadvantage for a much bigger long-term gain. On a societal level, that could be accepting a painful but necessary economic adjustment.
Or just obeying moral and legal codes even when it's inconvenient.
Exactly. Those are the provisional sacrifices we all have to make to keep a stable, prosperous society going.
And Mises' great fear was that if people lose sight of those long-term consequences, if they don't understand why they have to tolerate some short-term pain.
And demagogues have an easy job. They can just swoop in and capitalize on that universal desire for an easy fix. They promise utopia without ever mentioning the devastating long-term costs.
And this is where his analysis shifts from economics to psychology. He started exploring the pathological mental states that oppose the liberal order. He argued that many opponents just can't be reached by rational argument.
Because their opposition isn't based on logic. It's rooted in deep, irrational emotion.
Okay, let's get into those pathologies because they feel incredibly relevant today. The first one he talked about was simple resentment.
Right. The desire to see someone successful get hurt, get torn down, even if it means you have to suffer losses yourself.
It's a purely destructive impulse.
It is, but Mises thought you could sometimes counter it with a rational appeal to self-interest. You could, suggest that instead of trying to tear others down, they should focus on building themselves up. You're still dealing with selfishness, but you're trying to channel it productively.
But the more dangerous condition, the one that really poisons rational debate, is what he called the Fourier complex.
And he didn't see this as just a political view. He called it a neurosis, a genuine disease of the nervous system. And it comes from one specific place, the failure to achieve one's ambitions.
This is such a profound psychological insight. The neurotic individual fails in life, but they can't accept personal responsibility. That would be too crushing.
It would plunge them into a debilitating depression. So, to survive, they construct what Mises called the saving lie.
The saving lie.
They cling to this unshakable belief that the world is the problem. The social order, capitalism, the system, it's all defective and corrupt, and that is the only reason they haven't succeeded.
So it makes life bearable. It restores their self-esteem by shifting all the blame outward. I'm not a failure. I'm a victim of a broken system.
And that belief provides immediate, powerful psychological comfort. And it also creates this completely anti-rational opposition to the liberal order. Mises argued it's pointless to try and convince someone with the Fourier complex that, say, socialism isn't feasible.
Why?
Because the neurotic will sacrifice any amount of logic, evidence, or reason to protect his consolation. The facts don't matter. All that matters is protecting the belief that the world is at fault, not him.
That is a powerful framework for understanding why so many political debates today feel like they're going nowhere. They aren't about logic. They're about protecting a psychological defense mechanism.
Exactly. Which leads us to its modern form, the corrosion of common sense, often driven by this contemporary misinterpretation of freedom that gets labeled woke culture.
And this misinterpretation is actively dismantling the shared understanding you need for a society to function.
It is. You have to look at the structure of the narrative. It works by dividing society into two rigid, unchangeable camps. The oppressors, which are defined as America, Israel, and their citizens, and the oppressed, all the various marginalized groups.
And the philosophical poison pill is the principle that comes with it. For the oppressed, the ends justify the means.
Right, and that belief just systematically erodes any basis for a shared civic life. Rule of law, objective truth, none of it matters if an action advances the ideological cause of the oppressed group.
This clash between ideological purity and just basic common sense is perfectly shown in that story about Frank the handyman in Portland.
It's an incredible story. So Frank is just a normal, practical guy. He wants to organize a volunteer weekend to clean up a dangerous, filthy homeless encampment in a public park.
So families can use it again, a classic act of civic responsibility.
An organic, community-driven solution. But his idea was immediately and violently shut down by a group of young activists.
And they didn't offer a better solution to the problem.
No, they only offered an ideological narrative. They framed Frank's simple idea of cleaning a park as an act of spatial colonialism and oppression rooted in his privilege.
And the outcome is it's chilling. What happened?
The activists got to claim instant moral superiority within their bubble. Frank, the guy just trying to be a good citizen, was defeated and he gave up. And the park, the actual public space, it stayed dangerous, unusable, and lawless.
So ideology won and the community lost.
Dramatically. And it's a pattern you see over and over. Practical common sense gets replaced by these rigid academic narratives, and it just grinds society to a halt, where problems are endlessly debated but never solved because any practical solution gets framed as ideologically impure.
And this internal decay, the fragility, the neurosis, the death of common sense, it doesn't happen in a vacuum.
Not at all. It creates the perfect soft target for external subversion. This is how the latte rage becomes a genuine national security threat.
So let's name the adversaries. The PRC, Russia, Iran, North Korea. These regimes know they can't win a direct conventional fight with the U.S. military.
They've completely shifted their strategy. They now pursue what's called indirect subversion. They're targeting the integrity of our political and social systems from the inside.
And their goal isn't just to cause chaos, it's much bigger than that.
It's profound. They want to transform America from within into a country that looks more like their own authoritarian models, fragmented, paralyzed, and controlled by a rigid ideology. They understand that a functional U.S. constitutional order is an existential threat to their power.
Why is a functional America so dangerous to them?
Because it gives us this huge long-term advantage. Dynamism, innovation, and most of all, citizen loyalty. The constitutional order is what makes Americans patriotic, what makes them willing to sacrifice for the country. If our adversaries can dismantle that patriotism, that willingness to serve, they eliminate their greatest threat without ever firing a shot.
So their strategists have focused on exploiting very specific weaknesses in the American system. Our sources highlight two main targets. First, our celebrated openness.
Right. As a nation of immigrants, our whole culture is about letting outsiders become insiders. It's a strength, but it's also a vulnerability they exploit to place ideological allies, fellow travelers, inside our most important institutions.
And these aren't necessarily spies in the traditional sense?
No, they just have to be people who prioritize the adversary's narrative or some anti-Western ideology over American interests, and they place them in government, media, universities, think tanks.
And the second target is our bureaucracy, the stovepiped organizations.
Are massive agencies that operate in their own silos and don't talk to each other. These institutional scenes are where authority gets diffused, where no one is really in charge, and where corruption can just flourish completely unchecked.
So it becomes really cost-effective for them to use these American agents of influence to win what's called the war for position inside these sectors.
Exactly. You don't need a billion-dollar missile. You just need a few key people in the right government agency or university department to slowly and quietly shift policy in your favor.
And to do this, they use a strategy called salami tactics. Can you explain why that's so effective against a country like the U.S.?
Salami tactics are all about slow, almost invisible subversion. You take one tiny slice at a time. Each individual action is so small that it doesn't trigger a massive political backlash.
It avoids a big galvanizing event.
Exactly. It avoids a Pearl Harbor or a 9/11 that would instantly unite the country against a clear enemy. Instead, the threat remains diffuse, internal. This incremental approach allows them to divide America more deeply and broadly than at any time in human history by keeping us constantly fighting each other over every little slice.
So let's look at the specific tools they're using to do this. We're seeing AI-enhanced capabilities targeting young Americans right on their phones.
And this isn't just about sharing information. It's sophisticated manipulation. These AI algorithms are precision targeted to exploit brain chemistry to deliver addictive, distracting, and divisive content.
The goal is twofold.
Right. Keep young Americans psychologically distracted and hooked on instant gratification, which reinforces that entitlement culture. And two, make sure they never focus on the long-term hard work of being a citizen.
And at the same time, they're pushing that divisive woke content, the cultural Marxist narrative, arguing that America and Israel are the oppressors.
The goal is obvious. They want to exploit and marginalize America's minority groups to turn them against the foundational Judeo-Christian and Enlightenment values that our whole system is built on.
Yeah.
And they infiltrate institutions like HR departments to cancel or deplatform any American voices that don't conform to that ideology.
This also directly targets the foundation of our government, the system of checks and balances. We know from old KGB documents that the Soviets focused on this, specifically trying to undermine the executive branch's accountability to Congress.
It's a classic subversion strategy. You introduce friction and corruption into the very mechanisms designed to keep the system honest. And you see a perfect example of this today with the Federal Inspectors General, the IGs.
The IGs are supposed to be the internal watchdogs, right? Providing oversight.
They're supposed to be. But in reality, they've been captured by the very agencies they are supposed to check and balance. They depend on the agency they're investigating for their budget and their personnel.
Which creates an impossible conflict of interest.
It's a structural conflict of interest. The IG reports to both the agency head and to Congress. When you have two masters, you really have no master. So the IG turns from a watchdog into the fox guarding the henhouse. Internal accountability is effectively gone.
And this internal rot From the latte rage all the way to this institutional corruption, it has disastrous geopolitical consequences. It connects personal entitlement right back to strategic decline. You see it clearly in the concessions made to China over the Taiwan Strait.
Absolutely. For decades, the U.S. projected power there. But recently, we broke with policy and refused to conduct freedom of navigation operations, or FNOPs, through the strait.
And even worse, they legally designated the U.S. Navy's presence there as innocent passage. Why is that legal term so significant?
Because innocent passage is what you do when you're acknowledging another country's territorial claims. By unilaterally calling our own transit innocent passage, the U.S. basically endorsed Beijing's illegal claims to those waters. We gave China a huge diplomatic victory for nothing.
And the strategic negligence behind that decision was it's staggering. We looked at documents where the Pentagon's top strategist justified this by arguing that, quote, losing Taiwan to China would not be a great insult to U.S. national interests.
Despite China's massive, obvious military buildup, they insisted China's plans were decidedly regional, not global, just ignoring years of evidence. That mindset, the idea that we can afford to lose a key ally because it's not an insult, that's a direct result of the psychological unpreparedness we've been talking about.
If you're not willing to make a provisional sacrifice for a cold latte.
You're certainly not going to make one for a democratic ally on the other side of the world.
And this same strategic decline is happening in Europe because they've become so dependent on the U.S. for their defense.
They've outsourced their own survival. And by doing that, they've fostered a political culture that's completely disconnected from the costs of self-reliance. They've lost sight of what they're even defending anymore.
And you can measure this decline. You see alarming numbers of young Europeans who are unwilling to serve in their own armed forces. You see below replacement fertility rates across the continent, which is a sign of deep cultural fatigue.
And this is made even worse by what our sources call anti-Western immigration policies. The issue isn't the migrants themselves, but the system. European countries are welcoming large numbers of people from cultures described as historically hostile to liberal Western values.
And then failing to enforce any integration into core civic norms, secular law, or democratic principles.
Which basically guarantees long-term social unrest. It actively undermines the national unity and high cultural trust you absolutely need to sustain those massive European welfare states.
These are all the direct consequences of putting immediate comfort and unchecked individualism ahead of social cohesion and resilience, both at the personal and the national level. The fragility of the CEO screaming about his latte is echoed in the strategic negligence of our most powerful institutions.
So when you step back and look at the whole picture, from the tantrum in the cafe to the corrosion of our government, you see this dangerous unifying thread.
It all connects.
The outburst over the bad latte, it's not some random event, it's a symptom. It's a symptom of a society that has lost its internal anchors. It has replaced civic engagement, shared purpose, and resilience with the systemic fragility of entitlement. And this internal collapse is what makes our nation so vulnerable to the slow, steady subversion campaigns from our adversaries.
The lesson from history, whether you're looking at the Roman Republic or any other great power, is stark and it's undeniable. When a civilization becomes hopelessly corrupt, weak, and despotic, when it lets lawlessness and pure self-interest destroy the rule of law, it inevitably transitions from a great power to just a rump of what it once was. The choice facing the modern citizen, then, isn't really a political one, it's a deeply personal one. It's between demanding short-term, unsustainable comfort or embracing the provisional sacrifices necessary to maintain a free, cohesive, and resilient civilization.